Are you ready for today's horror story? Yo, listen up, cause I got a tale that's gonna chill your bones. And I ain't just talking about the cold night air. This all went down in my own house. The kind of place you're supposed to feel safe, right? Well, not so much. It began on what was supposed to be a regular Thursday night. You know, one of those nights where you just crash hard after a long day of grind, expecting the world to stay quiet until the alarm buzzes the next morning. My wife, bless her, she's been battling with insomnia for years, which turns our home into a real-life library come nighttime. You could hear a pin drop. It's that quiet. But this night, man, this night was different. It was like the universe decided to flip the script on me. Just as I was drifting off into that sweet spot of sleep, there it was. A sound so out of place it yanked me back to consciousness. The garbage disposal in the kitchen was going off, grinding and buzzing like some sort of mechanical beast in the throes of rage. Weird, right? 'Cause my wife, she's as quiet as a mouse. Never been one to snack late or mess around in the kitchen once she's settled for the night. At first, I thought I was dreaming, you know. Your brain does that sometimes, throws in some weird sound effects into your dreams. But nah, this was no dream. The sound was relentless, gnawing at the edges of my sanity. I lay there for what felt like hours, sheets tangled around me, every buzz and grind echoing through the silent house like a warning. I told myself it was nothing, probably just a glitch. Appliances act up all the time, right? But deep down, a seed of unease had planted itself. Our neighborhood was as typical as they come. Kids playing in the streets by day, porch lights flickering at night. Nothing ever happened here. So why did this feel so off? As the nights rolled on, the noise became my unwanted nightly visitor, a ghostly routine that left me tossing and turning while my wife supposedly slept soundly upstairs. My mind raced with questions. Was I losing it? Was there something wrong with the electricals? Or, crazier still, was someone, or something, messing with us? I knew I had to find out what was going on, but nothing could prepare me for the truth of what I was about to discover. So there I was, each night a carbon copy of the last, the noise driving me nuts. I'd get up, heart racing, feet cold against the floorboards, and stomp over to the kitchen. And just like some sick joke, the moment I'd hit the light switch, silence. The thing would stop. Dead silence. My wife still upstairs, supposedly snoozing like a baby. Or so I thought. I tried talking to her about it, but she just shrugged it off, muttered something about me probably just hearing things. But I wasn't buying it. Something was off. I started to pay more attention, you know, during the day. My wife, she's always been the quiet type, but now there was something different about her. She was jittery, eyes darting around like she was expecting something to jump out from the corners. She'd avoid my gaze, mumbly her words, and sometimes I'd catch her staring blankly at the kitchen sink, her expression unreadable. It was like she was part of a secret that I wasn't privy to. It made my stomach twist in knots, not just the fear but the gnawing suspicion. Nights became a blur of interrupted sleep and whispered arguments. Our home, once a place of comfort, started to feel like a stage for some eerie play we were both unwilling actors in. I tried to convince myself it was stress, the job, her insomnia, anything but the creeping thought that my wife was hiding something from me. Then there were the other things, small changes that you wouldn't notice unless you were really looking, but once you saw them, they stuck out like sore thumbs. Cups and plates would go missing, only to reappear in places you'd never think to put them. The kitchen floor, usually cold and spotless, was now perpetually damp when I'd step into it each morning. And then there was the smell, an odd, metallic tang that lingered in the air, subtle but unmistakable once you noticed it. Each day bled into the next, my mind a whirlpool of doubt and confusion. I needed answers, but every time I tried to piece things together, my thoughts would just slip away like shadows in the night. It was like living in a fog, one that was slowly suffocating everything we had built together. I knew I couldn't go on like this, trapped in a cycle of suspicion and fear. Something was terribly wrong, and I had to find out what it was. But I was not prepared for the truth. Nothing could have prepared me for what I was about to uncover in the heart of my own home. The mystery of the nightly disturbances gnawed at me, an itch that just couldn't be scratched away. My once peaceful slumbers were now battlegrounds of tossing, turning, and cold sweats. Each night, as the clock ticked mockingly towards the witching hour, I'd find myself more alert, my senses sharpened to a razor's edge. The sound of the disposal became a sinister lullaby, a herald of the unease churning inside me. Enough was enough. Determined to unearth the truth, I decided one night to lay a trap for whatever ghost or gremlin had taken up residence in our kitchen. I pretended to sleep, my breaths measured, eyes closed but mind racing. The hours stretched, eternal and suffocating, until finally the familiar rumble began. Heart pounding like a frantic drummer, I slipped out of bed, my movements silent, deliberate. The darkness felt alive, pressing against me as I made my way downstairs, guided by the faint, eerie glow of the moonlight spilling through the windows. The noise grew louder, more insistent, as if aware of my approach. I paused at the kitchen door, a sliver of light from the moon painting a narrow path across the floor. The sound was deafening now, the mechanical grinding and buzzing of the disposal cutting through the silence like a scream. I steeled myself, ready for whatever lay ahead, and nudged the door open. The sight that met my eyes was something out of a twisted fairy tale. There, in the glow of the moonlight, stood my wife, her back to me, hunched over the sink. But this was not the woman I knew. This figure was rigid, movements jerky and unnatural as she fed something into the hungry maw of the disposal. It wasn't food. It writhed and twisted, a shadowy form that defied the laws of nature. My breath caught in my throat, a silent scream strangled by disbelief and horror. I wanted to call out, to ask what unholy ritual I was witnessing, but the words died on my lips, suffocated by the thick air of dread that filled the room. My wife seemed unaware of my presence, or perhaps too engrossed in her macabre task to care. With a final, violent shove, she pushed the writhing mass down the disposal, the machine's growl reaching a feverish crescendo before cutting off abruptly, leaving an oppressive silence in its wake. She stood still for a moment, a statuesque figure of menace, before turning towards the door. I ducked back, heart racing, fearing both for my sanity and my life. Had she seen me? What would she do if she had? I was a man paralyzed, caught between the desire to flee and the need to confront. But confrontation would have to wait, for in that moment, I was nothing more than a witness to the inexplicable and the terrifying. The implications of what I'd just seen were beyond comprehension, spiraling into realms of darkness I'd never dared to explore. The night was far from over, and the true horror of my discovery had yet to reveal itself. But one thing was crystal clear. My home, my marriage, my very reality, were all lying on a precarious edge, threatening to tumble into the abyss with the slightest whisper of truth. In the immediate aftershock of witnessing my wife's unsettling actions, my heart raced a marathon against sanity. The once familiar contours of our kitchen morphed into a stage for nightmares, illuminated by the ghastly moonlight that seemed to sneer at my disbelief. My wife, the woman I pledged my life to, now a stranger, enshrouded in shadows and secrets. My body trembled, not just from the cold tiles beneath my bare feet, but from a deep, gnawing chill that seemed to seep into my very soul. I wanted to scream, to shatter the silence with accusations and demands for truth, but fear rooted me to the spot. Fear of the unknown, fear of the now alien being my wife had become, and most profoundly, fear of what my life had turned into. With her back still turned to me, she completed her dark task, leaving me to grapple with the horrifying spectacle. The disposal fell silent, as if it too were holding its breath, waiting for what was to come. My mind raced with nightmarish possibilities. What was that thing she was feeding into the disposal? Where did it come from? And most hauntingly, why? I knew I couldn't let this go. I had to understand, to confront the grotesque reality that had invaded my home. But as I steeled myself to step forward, to break the silence with the weight of my newfound horror. My foot slipped. Betrayed by the wet floor, a grim reminder of the night's grim proceedings. The sound, though slight, was a clarion call to the absurdity of the situation. My wife turned, her face a mask of shock and something darker, something I couldn't quite place. Our eyes locked, and for a moment, time stood still. In her gaze, I saw not the woman I married, but a stranger, harboring secrets as deep and as dark as the night itself. Before I could confront her, before I could voice the terror and betrayal swirling inside me, she fled. Her footsteps a staccato beat against the staircase, leaving me alone with the echoing silence and the chilling aftermath of her actions. The pull towards the sink was magnetic, a perverse siren call. I approached with trepidation, every cell in my body screaming to turn away, to flee from the madness that had infiltrated our home. But I had to know. I reached out, shaking, to the switch of the disposal, a grotesque part of me needing to hear its roar, to confirm it was not just a vessel of nightmares. But nothing could have prepared me for the searing pain that followed. As my hand hovered over the sink, something lurched from the darkness, a horror made of shadow and malice. It was like nothing of this earth, a grotesque parody of life, hungry and relentless. The agony was immediate and overwhelming, a burning, tearing sensation that obliterated all other senses. My screams filled the room, a primal, desperate sound that I barely recognized as my own. And then, as suddenly as it had attacked, the entity was gone, retreating back into the abyss from which it had sprung, leaving me reeling, my hand a mangled remnant of what it once was. The kitchen, once a place of warmth and laughter, had become a scene of unspeakable horror. The cold, hard reality of my situation set in as I cradled what remained of my hand, the pain, a constant, throbbing reminder of the nightmare that had just become my reality. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the betrayal that gnawed at my insides. My wife, the other half of my soul, had brought this terror into our home, had fed it, nurtured it. The trust we'd built over years shattered in an instant, replaced by a gaping, bleeding wound that mirrored the physical one. As the shock began to ebb, replaced by a cold, hard determination, I knew that my life, as I had known it, was over. The woman I loved, the life we shared, had been a facade, hiding something dark and unfathomable. And now, I was left to face the consequences, my body and heart broken, my mind teetering on the brink of madness. The night was far from over, and the true extent of the horror was yet to unfold. But in those moments of agony and betrayal, one thing became chillingly clear. My home was no longer a sanctuary, and my life would never be the same again. The dawn that followed that nightmarish ordeal was a cruel irony, its light mocking the darkness that had consumed my life. Waking up in the sterile whiteness of a hospital room, my mind a tumultuous sea of confusion and pain, I was a shipwreck of a man, adrift and alone. The bandages around where my hand used to be were a grotesque testament to the reality I now lived in, a constant, throbbing reminder of the horror I had endured. The police came, of course. They asked their questions, their faces a blend of professional concern and barely concealed skepticism. How could I explain the unexplainable? That my wife, the woman I shared my life with, had been harboring a darkness so profound it defied understanding. That our ordinary, mundane existence hid secrets so terrifying they seemed ripped from the pages of a horror novel. As I recounted the events, I saw the doubt in their eyes, heard the hesitancy in their questions. I could hardly blame them. If I hadn't lived it, I wouldn't have believed it either. The tale of a mysterious entity lurking in our kitchen sink, of my wife's inexplicable actions, it all sounded like the delusions of a man pushed past the brink of sanity. After the police left, the silence of the hospital room was suffocating. I was left alone with my thoughts, a dangerous neighborhood to wander in given my current state. The reality of my situation began to truly sink in. My wife was gone, vanished without a trace, leaving behind only questions and a gaping, empty void where my trust and love once resided. The betrayal cut deeper than the physical loss of my hand. It was a wound to my very soul, a breach of the sacred trust between two people that I feared would never heal. The days blurred into one another, marked only by the changing of bandages and the visits from faceless doctors and nurses. The hospital room became my new prison, the bars made not of steel, but of pain, loss, and betrayal. And then, the final blow came, the plumber's report, delivered by a detective with a look of confused pity. The garbage disposal, the focal point of my nightmare, was devoid of any mechanical parts. It was, as the plumber put it, just an empty hole leading nowhere. The implications were chilling, the pieces of a horrifying puzzle clicking into place. There had been no malfunction, no logical explanation for the events that had unfolded. It was as if the very fabric of reality had twisted, leaving me adrift in a sea of madness and despair. As I was discharged from the hospital, the weight of my new reality settled heavily on my shoulders. The world outside seemed bright, too loud, too real. I returned to an empty house, a place once filled with laughter and love, now a mausoleum to my past life. Everywhere I looked, memories taunted me, whispers of a life that was irrevocably altered. In the end, I was left with nothing but questions and scars, both physical and emotional. The truth of what happened, of what lived in our sink, of where my wife had gone, might forever remain a mystery. But one thing was clear. I had survived. Broken, yes. Alone, undoubtedly, but alive. And so, I share my story, a tale too bizarre and horrifying to be anything but truth. I share it as a warning, a plea. Be vigilant of the shadows that lurk in your own home, of the secrets that might poison the most mundane aspects of your existence. For in the end, we are all just one twist of fate away from a nightmare becoming our reality. And hey, if you've got a story like this, or heard something that chills your spine, drop a comment below. Share your story, 'cause sometimes talking's the only thing that keeps the darkness at bay.